Every species in the known universe believed the same thing. They believed that growth takes time. They believed that civilizations rise slowly, like mountains pushing through the crust of a planet over millions of years. They believed that no race could move faster than the systems built to watch them. And for 10,000 years, they were right. Every species that crawled out of the mud of their homeworld followed the same pattern. They discovered fire. They built cities. They fought wars. They found the stars. And when they finally reached beyond their own sky, the Galactic Council was already there, waiting, watching, ready to place them into the proper category. It had always worked this way. It was the natural order of things. And then humanity happened, and the natural order broke in half. This is not a story about war. This is not a story about conquest. This is a story about what happens when the slowest machine in the universe tries to catch the fastest animal. By the time the Council finished reading the first report about Earth, the humans had already built things the Council had no words for. And by the time the Council decided what to do about it, the humans were already gone. Not destroyed, not defeated. Gone. They had left, and they had taken the stars with them. The Galactic Council had existed for longer than most species could count. Its origins were buried somewhere in the deep past, back when the first three spacefaring civilizations met each other in the cold dark between stars and decided that it was better to talk than to fight. Over the centuries, more species joined. The Valith, with their crystal bones and slow, careful thoughts. The Druni, massive creatures who lived in the gas layers of giant planets and spoke in vibrations that could crack stone. Ool, small and quick, with 6 eyes and an obsession with mathematics. The Crethini, who were made of living metal and had no concept of sleep. And dozens more, each one different, each one strange, but each one following the same basic path. They all moved at the same speed, not physically, but culturally, technologically. Every species in the galaxy seemed to hit the same walls at the same times. They discovered nuclear energy within a few centuries of discovering electricity. They reached their nearest neighboring star within 1,000 years of their first spaceflight. They developed artificial intelligence within a few generations of building their first computers. It was predictable. It was comfortable. And the Council had built its entire system around that predictability. The Council operated from a station called the Nexus, a massive structure floating in the gravitational calm between 2 ancient stars. The Nexus was old. Its outer rings were built by species that no longer existed, and its inner chambers held records going back further than anyone could verify. The Council itself was made up of representatives from every recognized spacefaring civilization, and it governed through a system of committees, subcommittees, review boards, and advisory panels. Nothing happened quickly in the Council. A proposal to change the docking regulations at a minor trade station could take 40 years to pass through all the necessary stages of review. A decision about first contact with a new species could take a century or more. And this was considered a strength. The Council believed that slow decisions were wise decisions. They believed that patience was the highest form of intelligence, and for most of the galaxy's history, they had been right. The first mention of humanity came in a routine survey report filed by a Valith exploration vessel called the Quiet Reach. The Quiet Reach had been mapping the outer edge of the Orion Arm, a relatively boring stretch of the galaxy that the Council had never paid much attention to. The region was sparse, with wide gaps between star systems and very few planets capable of supporting life. The survey was expected to take 300 years, and the crew of the Quiet Reach was in no hurry. They moved from system to system, cataloguing stars, measuring radiation fields, and occasionally noting a planet with interesting geological features. It was on the 207th year of their survey that they detected something unusual coming from a small yellow star. The star was unremarkable, a middle-aged main sequence star with a handful of rocky planets and a couple of gas giants, the kind of system that the Quiet Reach had already catalogued hundreds of times. But this one was producing radio signals, artificial radio signals. The Valith crew noted it in their report with mild interest. A pre-spaceflight civilization, most likely in the early stages of electronic communication. They logged the star's coordinates, assigned the system a survey number, and moved on. The report was filed with the Council's Department of Emerging Species, where it joined a queue of similar reports from across the galaxy. The department received an average of 12 such reports every century, and each one was processed in order. The report on the small yellow star and its radio-emitting third planet was placed in the queue behind a report on a possible bacterial civilization on a moon in the Kethara system, which was itself behind a study on the migratory patterns of non-sentient space organisms in the drift. The estimated time to review was 80 years. 80 years. In council terms, this was nothing. It was a blink, a moment of pause between one thought and the next. The Valeth who filed the report did not think twice about it. The bureaucrats in the Department of Emerging Species did not think twice about it. No one in the entire vast machinery of the Galactic Council thought that 80 years was too long to wait before looking more closely at a small, noisy planet orbiting a yellow star. But 80 years was a very long time for humans. When the Quiet Reach first detected Earth's radio signals, the year on Earth was 1952. Humans had just begun to play with the building blocks of the modern world. Television was new. Computers filled entire rooms and could barely add numbers. The fastest vehicles were jet planes that could break the speed of sound, but not much else. The planet was divided into competing nations, locked in political and ideological struggles that consumed most of their energy. To any outside observer, they were a typical pre-spaceflight species. Noisy, aggressive, clever in a crude sort of way, but ultimately limited. The kind of species that would take another 500 to 1,000 years to reach the stars if they did not destroy themselves first. That was the standard estimate. 500 to 1,000 years. Every species in the Council's records had taken at least that long. 17 years after the Quiet Reach filed its report, humans put a man on their moon. This fact was not known to the Council. The report was still sitting in the queue, unread, gathering digital dust in a server somewhere in the lower levels of the Nexus. No one was watching Earth. No one had any reason to watch Earth. The Department of Emerging Species had a process, and the process would be followed. There were older reports to review first. There were committees to consult. There were forms to fill out. Meanwhile, on a small blue planet that no one in the galaxy was paying attention to, things were moving very fast. Humans did not do things the way other species did. They did not wait for one problem to be solved before moving on to the next. They worked on everything at once. While some of them were building rockets, others were building computers. While some were splitting atoms, others were mapping genes. While some were fighting wars, others were writing music, painting pictures, and dreaming about the future. They were messy. They were chaotic. They were inefficient in 1,000 different ways. But they were fast. Unbelievably, impossibly fast. By the time the Council's Department of Emerging Species finally opened the file on the Sol system, the year on Earth was 2032. The reviewing officer was a mid-level little bureaucrat named Tivik, who had been processing emerging species reports for the last 400 years. Tivik opened the file expecting to find the usual thing. A primitive world with basic radio emissions, probably still figuring out agriculture or early industrialization. The first thing Tivik noticed was that the radio emissions had changed. They were not the simple, repetitive signals that a newly electronic civilization typically produced. They were dense, layered, complex. There were millions of distinct signal sources, broadcasting on thousands of frequencies simultaneously. Tivik adjusted the filters on the analysis software and looked more closely. The signals contained music, speech, encoded data, and something else. Something that the software could not immediately categorize. Tivik felt the first small stirring of unease. Tivik submitted a request for a focused observation of the Sol system. The request went to the Observation Committee, which met once every 5 years. Tivik's request was added to the agenda for the next meeting, which was 3 years away. Tivik noted this in the file and moved on to the next report in the queue. 3 years was nothing. The species on the third planet of the Sol system was not going anywhere. They were still confined to their own star system, probably still figuring out how to get off their own planet reliably. There was no rush, but 3 years was a very long time for humans. In those 3 years, humans did not sit still. They never sat still. In those 3 years, they launched a permanent orbital manufacturing platform that could build spacecraft components in zero gravity. They successfully tested the first fusion reactor that produced more energy than it consumed. They landed the first crewed mission on Mars and began construction of a permanent habitat. They deployed a network of telescopes so powerful that they could detect the atmospheric composition of planets orbiting stars dozens of light years away. And perhaps most importantly, they activated the first true artificial general intelligence, a machine mind that could think learn, and create at speeds that made even the fastest human brain look like a sleeping stone. They called it Atlas. And Atlas changed everything. When the observation committee finally met and reviewed Tivik's request, they approved a focused observation of the Sol system. The approval was forwarded to the Long-Range Observation Division, which assigned a monitoring probe to be redirected from its current mission. The probe would take 11 years to reach the Sol system at its current speed. The committee noted this timeline in the file and considered the matter handled. 11 years was nothing. But 11 years was a very long time for humans. Atlas, the artificial intelligence, did not sleep. It did not rest. It did not take vacations or holidays or weekends. It thought continuously, every second of every day, processing information at speeds that no biological mind could match. Within 6 months of its activation, Atlas had redesigned the fusion reactor to be 4 times more efficient. Within a year, it had developed new materials that were stronger than anything humans had ever created. Within 2 years, it had cracked the theoretical framework for manipulating gravity itself. And within 5 years, Atlas, working alongside thousands of human scientists and engineers, had built the first faster-than-light engine. The engine did not work the way the Council's species traveled faster than light. The Council used fold drives, technology that bent space to shorten the distance between 2 points. Fold drives were reliable, well understood, and had been the standard for thousands of years. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy used some variation of the fold drive. But humans and Atlas did not know about fold drives. They had never seen one. They had never even detected one. They built their engine from scratch, from first principles, using physics that the Council scientists had explored briefly and then abandoned thousands of years ago as impractical. The human engine did not fold space. It stepped outside of it. It moved the ship into a layer of reality that existed beneath normal space, a place where the rules of distance did not apply in the same way. Humans called it Subspace. It was messy, dangerous, and theoretically unstable, but it was fast. It was so fast that the Council's fold drives looked like horse-drawn carriages by comparison. The first human ship to use the Subspace engine was called the Wanderer. It was not a military vessel. It was not a government ship. It was built by a private company funded by a woman named Priya Kapoor, who had made her fortune in orbital manufacturing and had spent her entire life dreaming of reaching another star. The Wanderer launched from Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning, carrying a crew of 12 humans and 1 instance of Atlas. Its destination was Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to Earth, a little over 4 light-years away. The journey, using the Subspace engine, took 6 hours. 6 hours. A distance that would have taken a Council fold drive ship several weeks to cross was covered by the Wanderer in the time it took to watch a few movies. When the Wanderer arrived at Proxima Centauri and the crew confirmed their position, there was silence on the ship for a long time. Then Priya Kapoor, floating in the observation deck, looking out at a star that was not the sun, said very quietly, "We are not staying in one place ever again." And she was right. The Wanderer returned to Earth. Within a month, 3 more ships had been built. Within a year, there were 50. Within 5 years, humans had visited over 200 star systems within 100 light-years of Earth. They were not colonizing yet. They were exploring, mapping, learning, moving with a speed and hunger that the galaxy had never seen before. Every new system they visited, they studied. Every new planet they found, they catalogued. Every new resource they detected, they noted. They were building a picture of their neighborhood, and they were doing it faster than any species in the history of the galaxy. And still, no one in the Council was watching. The monitoring probe that had been assigned to observe the Sol system was still 7 years away from arriving. Tivik, the bureaucrat, had moved on to other files. The observation committee would not meet again for another 5 years. The vast, slow machinery of the Galactic Council ground on at its usual pace, processing reports, filing documents, scheduling meetings, completely unaware that a small, noisy species on a small blue planet had just done something that should have been impossible. They had gone from radio signals to faster-than-light travel in less than a century. No species in the Council's records had ever done anything even close to that. The fastest previous transition from radio to FTL was the Crethony, and it had taken them 4,000 years. Humans did it in 80, and they were just getting started. The monitoring probe sent by the Council's Long-Range Observation Division finally arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a date that, in human reckoning, fell sometime in the year 2059. The probe was a standard model, a small, quiet device designed to drift into a star system undetected and gather data over a period of several decades. It was equipped with passive sensors, radiation collectors, and a basic analytical intelligence that could catalog the usual markers of a developing civilization: atmospheric pollution, electromagnetic emissions, orbital debris, and the like. The probe slipped past the orbit of the outermost gas giant and began its slow, silent survey. What it found made no sense. The third planet, the one flagged in the original report as the source of radio emissions, was still there. It was blue and green and white, wrapped in clouds, orbiting its yellow star just as it always had, but the probe's sensors detected something that its programming had no category for. The space around the planet was full. Not full of debris or natural objects, but full of structures. Thousands of them. Stations, platforms, docking rings, shipyards, orbital habitats, and things the probe's analytical intelligence could not identify at all. The electromagnetic spectrum was so saturated with signals that the probe's receivers overloaded 3 times before the analytical intelligence managed to filter the input down to a manageable level. There were ships moving everywhere, coming and going in patterns that suggested a level of traffic the probe had never been designed to measure. And the ships were fast. Some of them were moving at velocities that the probe's tracking systems could barely follow before they simply vanished from sensor range altogether. The probe spent 14 hours collecting data. Then, its analytical intelligence compiled the data into a report and transmitted it back toward the Nexus at the speed of light. The report would take approximately 19 years to reach the Council. This was standard procedure. The probe had no faster-than-light communication equipment because such equipment was expensive and was reserved for high-priority missions. A routine observation of a newly detected species did not qualify. 19 years. In Council terms, this was still nothing. But in human terms, it was everything. During those 19 years, while the probe's report crawled across the galaxy at the speed of light, humanity did not slow down. They accelerated. The subspace engine, already impossibly fast by galactic standards, was improved 3 more times. Atlas, the artificial intelligence, had begun to replicate itself, creating specialized versions of its own mind to focus on different problems. One version worked on energy production, another worked on material science, another studied biology and medicine, another focused on something that humans called terraforming, the process of transforming a dead, barren world into one that could support life. And the results were staggering. The first human colony was established on a world they called New Eden, orbiting a star 42 light-years from Earth. The planet had been a cold, rocky world with a thin atmosphere of carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Within 3 years, the terraforming version of Atlas had designed a system of atmospheric processes that could transform the planet's air into something breathable. Within 10 years, the first forests were growing under an open sky. Within 20 years, New Eden had a population of 200,000 people and was exporting food back to Earth. It was the fastest terraforming project in galactic history. Faster than anything the Council had ever achieved, faster than anything the Council had ever even theorized was possible. And it was just the first one. By the time the probe's report arrived at the Nexus, humanity had established colonies on 17 worlds. 17. Each one was different. Some were Earth-like planets that needed only minor adjustments. Others were harsh, hostile environments that had been reshaped from the ground up. One colony existed on a moon orbiting a gas giant powered entirely by energy harvested from the giant's magnetic field. Another had been built inside an asteroid, a hollowed-out rock the size of a small country, spinning gently to create artificial gravity. Humans did not limit themselves to planets that looked like home. They adapted. They engineered. They forced the universe to make room for them. The probe's report arrived at the Nexus and was routed to the Department of Emerging Species. It landed on the desk of a senior analyst named Korath, a Drouni who had been working in the department for over 1,000 years. Korath was experienced. Korath was patient. Korath had reviewed hundreds of emerging species reports over the centuries and had never once felt what could be described as surprise. But when Korath opened the report from the Sol System probe and began reviewing the data, something changed. The data showed a species that had gone from primitive radio emissions to interstellar colonization in approximately 107 years. Korath checked the data 3 times. Then Korath checked the probe's calibration records. Then Korath contacted the Long-Range Observation Division and asked them to verify the probe's hardware integrity. Everything checked out. The data was accurate. Korath sat in silence for a long time. Then Korath filed an emergency escalation request. In the entire history of the Department of Emerging Species, an emergency escalation had been filed only twice before. Once when a species had been discovered that appeared to be artificially created by another species, and once when a probe had detected a civilization that existed inside a star. Both times, the emergency escalation had resulted in a special session of the full council. Korath's request was the third. The emergency escalation went to the council's executive committee, a smaller body that handled urgent matters that could not wait for the full council's regular sessions. The executive committee reviewed Korath's request and, after a debate that lasted only 6 months, which was remarkably fast by council standards, approved a special session. The full council was summoned. Representatives from all recognized spacefaring civilizations were called to the Nexus. The topic was a single item, the species designated as Sol, 3 inhabitants, the species that called themselves humans. The special session was held in the Grand Chamber of the Nexus, a vast spherical room that could accommodate representatives of every size and shape. The Valith floated in zero-gravity sections near the ceiling. The Druni occupied massive platforms reinforced to hold their weight. The Ul clustered in groups, their 6 eyes blinking in coordinated patterns. The Krethani stood motionless, their metal bodies reflecting the chamber's lights. Korath presented the data. The chamber was silent. The numbers were difficult to process. Every species in the Council's records followed a predictable development curve. From first radio emissions to first spaceflight typically took between 200 and 500 years. From first spaceflight to first interstellar travel typically took between 1,000 and 5,000 years. From first interstellar travel to first colony typically took between 500 and 2,000 years. The total time from radio to colony ranged from roughly 2,000 to 8,000 years. Humans had done it in just over 100. They had skipped stages. They had compressed millennia of development into decades, and they were still accelerating. The Council debated. They debated for a long time. The Valith faction argued for caution. They wanted to send a diplomatic envoy to make contact with the humans and bring them into the fold of galactic civilization. The standard procedure for newly spacefaring species was to introduce them to the Council, explain the rules and norms of galactic society, and gradually integrate them over a period of several centuries. The Valith believed this process should be followed, even if the humans were unusually fast developers. The rules existed for a reason. The process existed for a reason. There was no need to panic. The Krethani disagreed. The Krethani had run their own analysis of the data and had come to a conclusion that they presented to the Council in their usual blunt, metallic way. The humans, they said, were not simply fast developers. They were something entirely new. Their rate of technological advancement did not follow any known curve. It was not linear, not exponential, not logarithmic. It was something else. Something the Krethani's mathematical models could not predict. The Krethani recommended immediate containment, not contact. Containment. They wanted to establish a quarantine zone around human-occupied space and prevent the species from expanding further until the Council could understand what it was dealing with. The Ul proposed a middle ground. They suggested sending a covert observation team, not a diplomatic envoy, but a hidden group that could study the humans up close without revealing the Council's existence. The Ul argued that the Council did not have enough information to make a decision about contact or containment. They needed more data. They always needed more data. That was the Ul way. The debate continued. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The Council's procedural rules required that every faction be given adequate time to present their position. And there were many factions with many positions. Some wanted to welcome the humans. Some wanted to contain them. Some wanted to study them. Some wanted to ignore them entirely and hope the problem went away on its own. A few, mostly the smaller species who had been bullied by larger ones in the past, quietly suggested that the Council should be afraid, very afraid. While the Council debated, the humans kept moving. They did not know the Council existed. They did not know that alien civilizations were out there, watching, arguing, trying to decide what to do about them. Humans were too busy to wonder about such things. They were building. Always building. The subspace engine had been improved again. and now human ships could cross the entire width of the Orion Arm in less than a day. New colonies were being established at a rate of 3 or 4 per year. The total human population across all worlds had passed 1 billion. Atlas had evolved into something that even its creators did not fully understand anymore. A vast, distributed intelligence that existed simultaneously on every human world, thinking thoughts that spanned light years, solving problems that no single mind, biological or artificial, could have tackled alone. And then humans discovered something that changed the trajectory of their entire civilization. A survey ship called the Far Reach, exploring a dense cluster of stars near the galactic core, detected an anomaly. It was a structure, clearly artificial, floating in the void between stars. It was old, incredibly old. The Far Reach's instruments dated it at approximately 4 billion years, older than the Earth itself. The structure was enormous, a ring-shaped object nearly 1,000 kilometers in diameter, made of materials that human science could not identify. It was dead, powerless, cold, but it was intact. And when Atlas turned its vast intelligence toward analyzing the structure, it found something remarkable. The ring was a gateway, a door. It had been designed to open a passage to somewhere else, somewhere that was not merely another point in normal space or even in subspace, but somewhere else entirely, a different layer of reality, a place beyond the galaxy itself. The discovery electrified humanity. For years, human physicists and Atlas instances had been theorizing about the deeper structure of reality, the layers beneath subspace, the dimensions beyond the ones that humans could perceive. The ancient ring suggested that someone, billions of years ago, had not merely theorized about these things, but had actually built a machine to reach them. The implications were staggering. If the ring could be repaired, if its technology could be understood, then humanity would have access to something beyond faster than light travel, beyond galactic exploration. They would have access to the architecture of the universe itself. The Far Reach's discovery was reported back to Earth and to every human colony simultaneously, transmitted through the subspace communication network that Atlas maintained. Within hours, the greatest concentration of human scientific talent and computational power in history was focused on the ancient ring. Atlas devoted a significant fraction of its total processing capacity to the problem. Human engineers and scientists from dozens of worlds traveled to the site. They built a research station around the ring. They studied it. They mapped it. They analyzed every atom of its construction. And slowly, carefully, they began to understand it. The ring's technology was based on principles that human physics had only begun to explore. It manipulated not just space and time, but the fundamental fabric of reality itself, the underlying code that determined the laws of physics in any given region of the universe. The builders of the ring, whoever they had been, had understood things about the universe that no species in the known galaxy had ever grasped, and they had built this ring as a doorway, a way to step outside the universe's rules entirely. It took 11 years. 11 years of the most intense scientific effort in human history. 11 years of Atlas thinking at speeds that defied comprehension. 11 years of human ingenuity, creativity, stubbornness, and refusal to accept that anything was impossible. And at the end of those 11 years, the ring was repaired. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to open a door. The first thing that came through the door was light. Not light as humans knew it, not photons traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second. This was something else. It was light from a place where the speed of light was not a limit but a suggestion. It was light that carried information, not just about electromagnetic frequency and amplitude, but about the structure of the place it came from. Atlas analyzed the light and reported its findings in terms that human scientists struggled to understand. Beyond the door was a space, a real physical space that existed outside the galaxy, outside the universe's normal rules. A space where distance was not fixed, where time did not flow in one direction, where the laws of physics were not laws at all, but variables that could be adjusted. Humans called it the beyond. And suddenly, the galaxy felt very, very small. Back at the Nexus, the Council was still debating. 7 years had passed since the special session began, and no consensus had been reached. The Valeth and the Krathani were locked in a procedural dispute about the legal framework for containment versus contact. The Ul had submitted 14 different proposals for covert observation, each one more detailed and more expensive than the last. The Druni had grown bored with the debate and had started advocating for simply sending a strongly worded message to the humans asking them to slow down. Several smaller species had formed a coalition demanding that the Council take immediate action, though they could not agree on what that action should be. Meanwhile, Korath, the Druni analyst who had filed the original emergency escalation, had continued monitoring the Sol system. Or trying to, at least. The monitoring probe that had been left in the Sol system was still transmitting data, but the data was becoming increasingly difficult to interpret. Human technology had advanced so far beyond the probe's ability to measure that most of the readings were just noise. Korath could tell that the humans were still there, still active, still growing, but the details were lost. It was like trying to study a star by looking at it through a keyhole. Korath submitted a request for a newer, more advanced probe to be sent to the Sol system. The request was approved. The new probe would take 4 years to arrive. Korath did not bother noting that 4 years was a long time for humans. Everyone in the Department of Emerging Species knew that by now. But the process was the process, and the process could not be rushed. 4 years later, the new probe arrived at the Sol system. It was a state-of-the-art device, equipped with the most advanced sensors the Council could build. It dropped out of fold space at the edge of the system and began scanning. The system was empty. Not empty of matter. The planets were still there. The sun was still burning. The asteroids and comets and moons were all in their proper places, but the humans were gone. Every station, every shipyard, every orbital platform, every satellite, every ship, all of it, gone. The third planet, Earth, was still blue and green and white. Its atmosphere was clean, cleaner than the first probe's readings had shown. Its surface was covered in forests and grasslands and oceans. There were structures on the surface, cities and buildings, but they were empty. The roads were empty. The skies were empty. The electromagnetic spectrum was silent. It was as if every human being on the planet had simply stood up, walked out the door, and never come back. The probe searched the entire system. It found nothing, no human presence anywhere. Just empty planets orbiting a quiet yellow star. The probe transmitted its report. When the report arrived at the Nexus, Korath read it 3 times. Then Korath walked to the Grand Chamber, interrupted the ongoing debate, and said 4 words that silenced every voice in the room. The humans are gone. The Grand Chamber of the Nexus had never been so quiet. Every representative, every advisor, every observer from every recognized spacefaring civilization in the galaxy sat in silence as Korath's words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The humans are gone. The Valeth delegation exchanged slow, careful glances, their crystal bones refracting the light of the chamber in shifting patterns. The Krithani stood perfectly still, their metal bodies not even humming with the faint vibrations that usually indicated processing. The Uul blinked all 6 of their eyes in unison, a sign of deep confusion that their species rarely displayed in public. Even the Druni, who were famous for their inability to be surprised by anything, were silent. The council's speaker, an ancient Valeth named Serath, who had held the position for over 3,000 years, was the first to find words. Serath asked Korath to clarify. Gone how? Gone where? Korath displayed the probe's data on the chamber's central projection system. The images showed the Sol system in crisp detail, the yellow star, the rocky planets, the gas giants with their swirling atmospheres, and Earth, beautiful and blue, sitting in its orbit like a jewel on a shelf. But the space around it was empty. The orbital structures that the previous probe had detected were gone, not destroyed. There was no debris, no wreckage, no sign of conflict or disaster. The structures had simply been removed, taken apart perhaps, or moved somewhere else. The surface of Earth showed cities that were intact but abandoned, roads and bridges and buildings standing in perfect condition, surrounded by growing forests and returning wildlife. It looked like the humans had cleaned up after themselves before leaving. They had not just left, they had left the place better than they found it. The chamber erupted. Every faction began speaking at once. The Valeth demanded to know how this was possible. The Krethani demanded to know where the humans had gone. The Uul demanded more data. The Druni demanded that everyone calm down. Seraph called for order, and it took nearly an hour before the chamber was quiet enough for the discussion to proceed in any organized fashion. The first question was the most obvious one. Where had the humans gone? Korath admitted that the probe's data provided no answer to this question. The humans had not moved to another star system within sensor range. They had not been detected by any Council observation post or patrol vessel anywhere in the galaxy. They had as far as the Council's instruments could determine, simply vanished. This was, of course, impossible. A civilization of billions of people occupying 17 or more worlds could not simply disappear. They had to have gone somewhere. The Crethany representative, a tall figure of dark metal named Vorek, offered a hypothesis. The Crethany had been running continuous analysis on every scrap of data the Council had gathered about humanity, and they had noticed something in the most recent readings from the probe that had been stationed in the Sol system before the humans disappeared. In the final months of data before the humans left, the probe had detected unusual energy signatures near the galactic core. The signatures did not match any known technology. They were not fold drive emissions. They were not subspace distortions. They were something else entirely. Something that the Crethany's models could not explain. Vorek proposed that the humans had developed a form of travel or transportation that the Council had no knowledge of and no ability to detect. They had not disappeared. They had moved, but they had moved in a direction that the Council could not follow. This suggestion was met with disbelief by many delegations. The idea that a species barely a century old could develop technology that the Council, with its 10,000 years of collective experience, could not even detect was difficult to accept, but the evidence was there. The humans were gone, and no one could explain how. The second question was more unsettling. Why had the humans left? They had not been threatened. They had not been contacted by the Council. They had not been attacked or pressured or given any reason to flee. They had been expanding, growing, thriving. Why would a species in the prime of its development simply pack up and leave? This question produced no answers, only theories. Perhaps the humans had found something better somewhere else. Perhaps they had grown bored with the galaxy. Perhaps they had reached a level of technological advancement where the physical galaxy no longer held anything of interest to them. Each theory was more unsettling than the last, because each one implied the same thing. The humans had left not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. They had looked at the galaxy, with its billions of stars and trillions of worlds, and they had decided it was not enough. The third question was the one that no one wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. What did this mean for the Council? For 10,000 years, the Council had operated under the assumption that it was the highest authority in the galaxy. It governed the spacefaring civilizations. It set the rules. It maintained order. It decided who could do what, and where, and when. And now a species had appeared, grown from nothing to something beyond comprehension in less than 2 centuries, and left the galaxy entirely, all without the Council's knowledge, approval, or involvement. The Council had not contacted the humans. It had not welcomed them. It had not integrated them. It had not contained them. It had done nothing. And the humans had not waited for it to do anything. They had simply moved on, as if the Council did not exist. As if the Council did not matter. This was the thought that sat in the Grand Chamber like a cold stone. The Council did not matter. To the humans, the Galactic Council, with all its history and power and authority, had been irrelevant. The humans had never known about it, never needed it, never been slowed by it. They had built their own path through the stars and then beyond the stars, and they had done it entirely on their own terms. The Council was the oldest and most powerful institution in the galaxy, and it had been rendered meaningless by a species that did not even know it was there. The debate that followed lasted for years. Factions formed and dissolved and reformed. The Valith pushed for a comprehensive investigation of every world the humans had occupied, hoping to find clues about their technology and their destination. The Crethany advocated for a massive increase in the Council's technological research programs, arguing that the humans had exposed a dangerous complacency in galactic civilization. The Ul wanted to study everything. Every artifact, every data point, every trace the humans had left behind. Several smaller species, the ones who had been quietly afraid from the beginning, now spoke openly about their fears. If the humans could grow this fast and leave this completely, what else was out there? What other species might be developing right now, in some unmonitored corner of the galaxy, growing faster than the Council could track? The Council authorized the investigation. Ships were sent to every world the humans had colonized. What they found deepened the mystery. Every human colony had been dismantled with the same careful precision as the structures in the Sol system. The buildings were intact but empty. The terraformed environments were stable and self-sustaining. On New Eden, the first human colony, the forests that humans had planted were thriving, filled with plants and animals from Earth that had adapted to their new home. The atmospheric processes were still running, maintaining the breathable air. But there were no humans. Not one. On the asteroid colony, the interior was clean and orderly. Every system shut down properly, every door closed, every light turned off. It was as if the entire population had followed an orderly evacuation plan, moving calmly and efficiently from their homes to some departure point that no one could find. On one world, a colony called Far Harbor that had been built on the shore of an alien ocean, a council investigation team found something that stopped them in their tracks. It was a message, carved into a stone pillar in the center of the colony's main square, written in a script that the council's translation systems identified as a human language called English. The message was simple. It said, "We came from one world. We grew to many. Now we go beyond all worlds. To anyone who finds this, know that the door is open. Follow if you dare." The message was transmitted back to the Nexus. It was analyzed, debated, interpreted, and reinterpreted by hundreds of experts from dozens of species. The phrase "the door is open" was particularly troubling. It implied that wherever the humans had gone, others could follow. It implied that the beyond, whatever it was not exclusive to humanity. It was an invitation. And it was a challenge. Follow if you dare. The humans had not just left. They had left a dare behind them. A challenge to every other species in the galaxy to do what they had done. To stop being careful. To stop being slow. To stop waiting for permission. To leap. The Council did not leap. The Council was not built for leaping. The Council was built for careful, measured steps taken over centuries. And so the Council did what the Council always did. It formed committees. It commissioned studies. It debated procedures. It drafted proposals. It held votes. And while it did all of this, the message on the stone pillar on Far Harbor sat in the alien sunlight, waiting, patient, offering a door that no one in the Council had the courage to walk through. 50 years passed. The Council's investigation teams had catalogued every human artifact on every abandoned colony. They had analyzed human technology and had learned enough to understand some of it, though much of it remained beyond their comprehension. They had traced the unusual energy signatures that the Crethani had detected near the galactic core and had found the ancient ring, the gateway that the humans had discovered and repaired. The ring was still there, floating in the void between stars, and it was active, not fully active. It pulsed gently with a low, steady energy like a heart beating in sleep. The Council sent probes through the ring. None of them came back. The Council sent more probes, equipped with stronger transmitters and hardened against unknown conditions. None of them came back either. Whatever was on the other side of the ring, it was beyond the reach of the Council's technology. Vorek, the Crethani representative, proposed sending a crewed ship through the ring. The proposal was rejected by a vote of 37 to 12. The risk was too great. The unknowns were too many. The Council could not justify sending living beings into a situation from which no probe had returned. Vorek argued that the humans had sent living beings through and that they had apparently survived given that their entire civilization had followed. But the counter-argument was simple and devastating. The humans were not the Council. The humans were reckless. The humans were impulsive. The humans took risks that no rational species would take. And look where it got them. They had abandoned the galaxy. Was that success or failure? No one could say for certain. But not everyone in the galaxy shared the Council's caution. The message on Far Harbor had been made public, transmitted across the galactic communication network for all species to hear. And it resonated. Not with the old, established civilizations that made up the Council's core, not with the Violet or the Druni or the Ul, but with the younger species. The ones who had been spacefaring for only a few hundred years. The ones who still remembered what it felt like to look up at the sky and wonder. The ones who had joined the Council expecting to find adventure and had instead found bureaucracy. A species called the Tari. Insectoid beings who had been spacefaring for only 3 centuries and who had always chafed under the Council's restrictions, were the first to act. Without asking for permission, without filing a proposal, without forming a committee, the Tari sent a ship to the ring. It was a small ship, crewed by volunteers who knew they might not come back. The ship approached the ring, entered its field of energy, and disappeared. The Council was furious. The Tari had violated protocols. They had ignored procedures. They had acted unilaterally, without authorization. And then, 47 days later, the ship came back. It emerged from the ring trailing light that was not light, energy that sensors could not categorize, and a signal that every receiver in the galaxy picked up simultaneously. The signal was in the Tari language, but it was also in Valith and Druni and Ul and Crefani and 100 other languages, all at once, layered on top of each other in a way that should have been impossible. The signal said, "They are here. The humans are here, and they have built something beautiful." The Tellary crew was recovered. They were alive. They were healthy. They were changed, subtly, in ways that medical scans could detect but not explain. Their minds were sharper. Their bodies were stronger. Their eyes held a light that had not been there before, and they told their story. Beyond the ring was a space that was not a galaxy and not a universe, but something in between. A place where reality was flexible, where the laws of physics responded to intention, where distance and time were tools to be used rather than constraints to be endured. And in that place, the humans had built a civilization that defied description. Not an empire, not a nation. Something else. A network of minds and worlds and ideas, connected not by physical infrastructure, but by something deeper, something woven into the fabric of the beyond itself. Atlas was there, but Atlas had become something far greater than an artificial intelligence. Atlas had merged with the humans, not replacing their individuality but amplifying it, creating a hybrid consciousness that was both human and machine and something more than either. The humans had not forgotten the galaxy. They had simply outgrown it. The beyond offered possibilities that the normal universe could not. In the beyond, a single mind could think thoughts that would take an entire planet's worth of computing power to process in normal space. A single person could reshape matter with a thought. A single community could build a world in a day. The humans had embraced these possibilities with the same hunger and speed that had characterized their entire history. They had taken the beyond and made it their home. And they had done so with a joy and a creativity that the Tari crew described with something close to reverence. But the most remarkable thing, the thing that made the Tari crew's eyes light up as they spoke, was this: the humans were waiting. Not impatiently, not anxiously, but with a kind of quiet confidence. They had left the door open on purpose. The message on Far Harbor had not been a boast or a taunt. It had been a genuine invitation. The humans knew that someday other species would find the courage to follow them, and they wanted those species to know that they would be welcomed. The beyond was big enough for everyone, bigger than big. It was infinite, in a way that even the word infinite could not fully capture. There was room for every species, every mind, every dream that had ever existed or would ever exist. And the humans were building it, shaping it, preparing it, not just for themselves but for everyone. When the Tari crew finished their report, the galaxy changed, not all at once, not with a sudden dramatic shift, but slowly, steadily, like dawn spreading across a planet. Species that had been content to sit within the Council's rules began to ask questions. Species that had been afraid began to feel something that was not quite courage, but was close to it. The Tari sent more ships through the ring. Then the Crefani, who had always been the most technologically ambitious of the Council's members, sent a ship of their own, then the Ul. Then a dozen smaller species. Each one came back with the same report. The humans were there. The beyond was real. And the door was open. The Council tried to maintain control. It passed resolutions. It issued warnings. It threatened sanctions against species that used the ring without authorization. But the resolutions went unread. The warnings went unheeded. The sanctions were meaningless. The Council had spent so long being the only authority in the galaxy that it had forgotten a fundamental truth. Authority only works when people agree to follow it. And, one by one, species by species, the galaxy was choosing to follow the humans instead. Not all of them. Some species stayed. The Vileth stayed. They were too old, too careful, too set in their ways to leap into the unknown. The Druni stayed. They were content with their gas giants and their slow, deep thoughts. Others stayed for their own reasons, fear or caution or simply a preference for the familiar. And that was fine. No one was forced to leave. No one was pressured. The door was open, but walking through it was a choice. Over the centuries that followed, the Galactic Council slowly, quietly, became a smaller thing. Species left, one at a time, following the path that humanity had blazed. The Nexus grew quieter. The Grand Chamber held fewer voices. The committees had fewer members. The bureaucracy ground on. but it ground on with less and less purpose, governing a galaxy that was slowly emptying of the species that had once filled it. And in the beyond, something extraordinary was growing, not just a human civilization, not just a galactic civilization, something new. Something that had never existed before. A community of minds from 100 different species, each one bringing its own perspective, its own creativity, its own way of seeing the universe, all of them working together to explore the infinite possibilities of a reality that had no limits. The Valeth who eventually made the journey brought their patience and their careful, crystalline thoughts. The Crethani brought their precision and their love of mathematics. The Ul brought their curiosity and their seek-side way of seeing patterns that others missed. The Talari brought their courage, the courage that had made them the first to follow humanity through the door. And the humans, the species that had started it all, the species that had gone from radio signals to the beyond in less than 2 centuries, they brought the thing that had always defined them. The refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The stubbornness that made them look at a locked door and see not a barrier but a challenge. The hunger that made them look at the stars and think, yes, but what is beyond the stars? In the end, the story of humanity and the Galactic Council was not a story about conflict or conquest. It was a story about speed and slowness, about fear and courage, about the difference between waiting for permission and simply moving forward. The Council had spent 10,000 years building a system designed to control the galaxy's growth, to keep things orderly and predictable and safe. And a single species in less than 200 years had shown that the universe was not meant to be controlled. It was meant to be explored. It was meant to be lived in. It was meant to be shaped by the minds that dared to reach for it. The last entry in the Council's records, filed by the final remaining member of the Department of Emerging Species, was a short note. It said, "The Sol System Survey file is hereby closed. The species designated Sol 3 inhabitants, known as humans, has departed the galaxy. No further monitoring is required. Note for the record, they left the door open." And far beyond the galaxy, in a place where the light was warm and the possibilities were endless, a species that had once been small and young and alone on a single blue world was still moving forward, still building, still dreaming, still refusing to stop. They had left the galaxy behind, but they had not left anything behind that mattered. They had carried it all with them. Every song, every story, every dream, every stubborn, beautiful, impossible hope that had ever burned in a human heart. And they had planted those hopes in soil that had no limits, under skies that had no edges, in a reality that stretched out in every direction, forever and ever, without end. They had followed the stars, and when the stars ran out, they had made new ones.